My name is Spencer Hale. I'm a professional interpreter. Not translator, interpreter. People mix that up all the time. Translation is about text. Interpretation is about people. You stand between two parties, absorb both languages in real time, and become the voice they trust. I've worked in oil fields, courtrooms, summit meetings, and once, in a helicopter over the Alps. But this job? This one stayed with me. It started with a message from a boutique agency I occasionally contracted for. High-profile couple seeking discreet, certified interpreter for business negotiation in San Diego. 3-day commitment. NDA required. Excellent compensation. Discreet. Certified. High-profile. I've learned those words usually mean, this is going to be weird. But the timing was right, and the money, better than usual. I accepted. They met me in the private lounge of a downtown hotel. She walked in first. Mid-30s, designer dress, calm eyes, posture like a blade, elegant and cold. Sienna Devereaux. Her husband entered behind her. Charles Devereaux, early 50s, confident, cheerful, shaking hands too long. I recognized him. Real estate, tech, heavy investor in European startups. I'd seen his face in Forbes. Charles grinned. Spencer, is it? We really appreciate you being here on such short notice. Sienna just nodded and said, let's be efficient. From the beginning, she didn't speak to Charles in French, even though the meeting would be with a French delegation. She spoke English, but would glance at me now and then, as if checking if I understood something she didn't say. Her words were precise. Measured. Too measured. That afternoon, I sat between them and the French team. 2 men and a woman, all dressed with impeccable Parisian casualness, discussing the proposed acquisition of a logistics software platform. I translated every word with the fluidity I was trained for. But there was something off. Every time I translated for Charles, Sienna would subtly rephrase him, sometimes softening his position, sometimes agreeing too quickly. At first, I chalked it up to corporate diplomacy. She was managing perception. But then I noticed. She occasionally slipped French phrases into her English when talking to the delegation, phrases Charles didn't understand. And they smiled knowingly. After the session, she pulled me aside in the corridor. You're very sharp, she said. You pick up context well. Comes with the job. She handed me a folder. These are some documents I'll need you to pre-translate for tomorrow. Just standard summaries. You'll be paid extra, of course. I took the folder. Of course. Back in my hotel room, I opened it. Inside were printed copies of investor agreements, partnership amendments, and oddly, a full letter of transfer assigning decision-making authority over a joint venture to someone not listed in the public records. The name, Luca Navarro. That was the moment the job changed. I looked him up. Tax consultant. Italian. Works with offshore entities. Nothing illegal on paper, but his name had floated through a few court filings in Luxembourg, unrelated to any clean business. And this letter, if signed and enacted, would remove Charles from controlling interest in the Paris deal. I stared at the name Navarro again, and then at the small handwritten note Sienna had tucked in. If needed, adjust phrasing for discretion. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wasn't paid to ask questions. I was paid to interpret. But I've learned over the years that words, when placed carefully, can make or ruin lives. The next day, things got stranger. During a break, I stepped out onto the terrace. Sienna was already there, talking softly into her phone in Italian. She didn't know I speak it fluently. I stayed back, hidden behind a column. Luca, he's almost out of the way, she whispered. The papers are drafted. If this goes well tomorrow, we move forward. Yes, I'm calm. He still thinks this is his project. He's clueless. She laughed. Not loud, not cruel, just amused. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. She wasn't just cheating. She was erasing him. Charles came out moments later, beaming with a cup of espresso. He had no idea. The next meeting was tighter, sharper. The delegation pushed for signatures. Charles hesitated, asking questions. Sienna grew impatient. She looked to me once, her eyes flat. Translate exactly, she said. So I did. But I also started making notes. That evening, she sent another file to my hotel room. No context, just a flash drive and a note. Tomorrow, final round. Be flawless. I opened the files. Embedded were subtle language traps. Phrasing that, once translated a certain way, could be interpreted as consent to transfer rights immediately, even if Charles said, pending review. It was elegant. Devious. I didn't sleep again, but I did start preparing. The next morning, I arrived at the conference room early. The lights were off, but the table was already set. Contracts neatly arranged, bottles of water aligned like sentries, pins resting precisely on signature lines. Too precise, like everything had been choreographed in advance. I wasn't part of the choreography. I took my seat at the end, unfolded my notepad, and laid out the flash drive Sienna had sent. I hadn't told anyone I made a copy of the documents overnight, including the altered phrasing and the original versions I pulled from the deal's press releases, which didn't match. It wasn't my first time dealing with corporate manipulation, but this time, someone's marriage was on the table too. Charles and Sienna arrived 5 minutes later. He looked refreshed. She looked victorious. Big day, Charles said with a grin, adjusting his cufflinks. Let's close this thing. Sienna said nothing, just nodded and took her seat, smoothing the fabric of her blazer. That same controlled posture. Almost too still. The French delegation entered shortly after. Air kisses, handshakes, pleasantries. I went to work. For the first 20 minutes, everything flowed. I kept my voice neutral, inflectionless, almost robotic, the way they trained us in Geneva when stakes were high. Charles was focused, occasionally referencing charts. The delegation praised the efficiency of his system. And Sienna? She sat back, letting him take the lead, only interjecting when it served to simplify a clause. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. A delegate named Baptiste slid a page across to Charles. This one outlines the ownership structure post-merger, he said in French. We've implemented the suggestions your associate provided. I translated faithfully. Charles glanced at the paper. His brow furrowed. Wait, why does this say 49% equity for the new holding company? I thought we agreed on 60. Sienna leaned forward, smiling too politely. It's just a placeholder, sweetheart. We'll finalize that later. Sweetheart. Charles blinked. We're not signing placeholders. She gave a look, brief, sharp. I'd seen it before in courtroom depositions. A look that said, shut up and smile. He didn't catch it. I did. Charles turned to me. Translate my objection exactly. I always do, sir, I said with a nod. Baptiste shifted in his seat. It's a flexible document, he said carefully. But the legal language is precise. It can be enforced as written. I translated that exactly too. Sienna reached for the document. It's fine, Charles. Just trust me. But Charles hesitated. And that's when it happened. One of the delegates, the younger one, Antoine, made a joke in French under his breath, thinking Charles wouldn't catch it. He said, she has him on a leash and doesn't even hide it. The fool has no idea he's about to disappear. My pen froze. I didn't translate that. Not yet. I looked at Charles. He smiled awkwardly, still focused on the numbers. And then I did something I shouldn't have done, at least not as a neutral interpreter. I leaned slightly toward him and said, in English, Sir, one of the delegates just implied this transfer may result in the loss of your authority. It may be wise to consult your legal advisor before signing anything today. The room fell silent. Charles blinked. What? Sienna turned to me. That's not your job, she said sharply. You're here to translate, not editorialize. I met her gaze. My contract includes maintaining professional integrity. That includes alerting a client to potential miscommunication when financial authority is at stake. One of the delegates muttered something. I didn't translate it. I looked back to Charles. He frowned. What exactly did he say? I repeated the phrase as neutrally as I could. The mood in the room shifted. Air went heavy. Charles leaned back. Let's take a break. Outside the room, he pulled me aside. What's going on? He asked. Why are they treating Sienna like the point of contact? I thought I was the majority stakeholder. I hesitated. This wasn't my fight, but I also wasn't going to be her accomplice. She submitted a few documents that imply otherwise, I said quietly, including one transferring control to a third party named Luca Navarro. His face went still. Navarro? From Milan. I nodded. He laughed. Just once, hard and bitter. I introduced them, he muttered. He helped us restructure tax brackets 2 years ago. I said nothing. Charles rubbed his eyes. I need copies of everything. Everything you've seen. Can you do that? I already have them backed up, I said. I didn't trust how this was unfolding. His jaw clenched. Don't tell her yet. Let's see what she tries next. When we returned to the room, Sienna was still seated, legs crossed, perfectly composed. She glanced up as we entered. All good. Charles smiled. Perfect. For the rest of the meeting, he played dumb. Nodded, signed nothing, asked naive questions. And she grew agitated, subtly. The way her eyes flicked when someone contradicted her. The way she tapped her nail against the table when a timeline slipped. I translated everything. But I also watched. Documented. Measured. She wasn't going to get away with it, at least not easily. Later that night, I received a message. Not from Charles. Not from Sienna. From an unknown number. If you know what's good for you, stay out of family business. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. I saved the message, screenshotted it, and then I began writing my report. If she thought I was just a voice in the room, she was about to learn I also had ears, eyes, and a spine. The next day, the temperature in the conference room felt several degrees colder, and not because of the air conditioning. Sienna barely acknowledged me when I entered. She didn't ask for a coffee, didn't offer a polite nod. Her jaw was tight, her smile non-existent. The warning message from last night hadn't been subtle, and it clearly came from someone close to her. But I didn't flinch. I was past the point of observing. Now I was engaged. Charles arrived a few minutes later, dressed sharper than usual, tailored navy suit, a subtle gold watch I hadn't seen before. He didn't smile either, just gave me a short nod. His eyes were sharper now, focused. He'd spent the night going through the documents I'd copied. He didn't say it, but I knew. He'd finally seen what his wife was trying to do to him. Sienna took charge the moment the French delegation sat down. We've reviewed the transfer documents, she said smoothly, and made the necessary adjustments. Spencer, if you'll begin. I didn't move. Charles cleared his throat. Actually, he said, I'll be handling today's documents myself. The room shifted. Sienna didn't flinch, but the tension around her eyes tightened. I thought we agreed I'd streamline the language, she said, still smiling, but her voice was edged. Charles leaned forward. You've been streamlining quite a bit lately, haven't you? Silence. He tapped the folder in front of him. Including adjusting ownership clauses, misrepresenting my position to our partners, and, here's the fun part, coordinating with an outside consultant without disclosing the relationship. Baptiste blinked. We assumed all of this was mutual. It wasn't, Charles replied. And from here on, all communications will go through my legal team. Sienna didn't speak. She stared at Charles, face blank, then slowly turned her gaze to me. You knew, she said quietly. I saw documents that didn't match, I replied calmly. And I did what any professional should, protected my client from miscommunication. Her eyes narrowed. You had no right. I had a responsibility. She stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. Charles raised a hand. No, Sienna. What's ridiculous is you thinking I wouldn't notice a full transfer of voting shares to your little Italian friend. That got her. Just a flicker, a blink too long, a breath caught in her throat. She tried to regain control. You're paranoid. Charles smiled. You're sloppy. And with that, he stood and gathered the files. We're done here. Baptiste, we'll be in touch after my lawyers scrub every inch of this agreement. He walked out, leaving silence behind. Sienna stood frozen for a few seconds, then turned to me. You just destroyed everything. No, I said. You did that yourself. I left the room before she could respond. Later that night, I found an envelope slipped under my hotel room door. No name. Inside, a single sheet of paper with one line. You think this is over. It isn't. I folded it neatly and put it in the same folder where I'd been documenting everything. Emails, recordings, even the call I'd overheard in Italian on the balcony. The next day, I checked out early. Charles had already returned to Los Angeles. The conference was over, but the story wasn't. Back home, I received an unexpected wire transfer, a bonus from Charles. No note, just a line in the transaction. Thanks for having a spine. I didn't contact him. I didn't need to. But 3 weeks later, the headline started. Devereaux Holdings restructures after internal dispute. Anonymous source alleges marital fraud in Paris deal. And finally, Luca Navarro under investigation for misrepresentation and international asset fraud. I didn't leak anything directly, but I'd passed the full document trail to a private investigator Charles hired after returning to LA. They took it from there. I followed Sienna's fall with a mix of satisfaction and restraint. She disappeared from social media. Her fashion startup, the one she'd planned to fund with Charles's equity, vanished overnight. Luca's company was delisted from 2 investor platforms. And me? I took a few months off, rented a cabin in Big Bear. Worked on a book. Something about the ethics of neutrality in hostile negotiations. Sometimes, justice doesn't need a courtroom or a gun. Sometimes, all it takes is someone who knows how to listen and when to speak. But I'll never forget the moment Sienna realized the man in the middle, the quiet interpreter, had turned the whole game on its head and walked away with a clean conscience. 2 weeks after I returned to California, Charles called me directly. Not his assistant. Not his lawyer. Him. His voice was steady, more focused than before, but there was an edge to it. I need you to meet someone, he said. No questions asked, I agreed. The next day, I sat in a quiet conference room across from a woman named Liv Walsh, one of Charles's legal advisors. She didn't bother with small talk. Just opened a file and projected a document on the screen, an unsigned draft of a financial agreement. One I'd never seen before. Liv tapped the screen. Sienna sent this to Luca directly. She marked it as for internal eyes only. She never mentioned this draft in official meetings. Can you confirm you never translated this version? I can, I said. And it was never shown during negotiations. She nodded. That was enough to tag the document as evidence of intent. But Liv wasn't done. She pulled up a second file, an export of Sienna's cloud backup. Charles had quietly retained access to her personal data. The emails were bad enough. The texts were worse. Between romantic notes, there were threads detailing a plan to siphon Charles's equity into shell companies connected to Luca. One message from Luca read, "Once the transfer is official, we disappear. You said he's too blind to notice?" Sienna had replied, "He believes I love him. That's all that matters." I translated the messages exactly as they were. No edits. No interpretation. Liv's expression didn't change, but I saw her index finger twitch, like she was holding back from typing faster. "This goes far beyond infidelity," she said quietly. "We're talking about fraud. Premeditated asset theft. She's not just leaving him. She's trying to ruin him." I sat back. This wasn't just a betrayal of the heart. It was corporate sabotage disguised as love. The next move came fast. Charles arranged a meeting in San Francisco under the pretense of a private investment round. Sienna and Luca thought they were pitching their new brand to elite investors. In reality, they were walking into a room of undercover legal and financial specialists, one of whom I'd be sitting beside. Charles asked me personally, "Want to be there when the curtain drops?" I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. The meeting was held on the 34th floor of a high-rise downtown. Everything looked professional. Polished glass, catered coffee, digital handouts. Sienna walked in first, dressed in bold crimson. She wore confidence like armor. Luca followed, smug and polished, clearly rehearsed. Sienna spotted me second. Her eyes froze for a moment. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "Just listening." She didn't like that. Luca kept talking. He introduced the brand, described the investment structure, even named future board members, none of which included Charles. The lead investor, a man named Jordan, let them talk for 20 minutes. Then he laid out a folder on the table. "Before we continue, can you verify these documents?" Luca leaned over. His face drained of color. They weren't supposed to exist. Sienna tensed beside him. "Where did you get that?" she asked. Jordan didn't answer. Instead, he calmly said, "We've cross-referenced these with several filings. They appear to show a misrepresentation of asset origin and the use of a falsified shareholder signature. Yours, Miss Devereaux." Silence. Luca stood abruptly. "We're done here." "Actually," Jordan replied, "we've already filed preliminary findings with the SEC and Italy's consul. You're free to go, but we'll be in touch." Security didn't escort them out. It wasn't that kind of meeting. But it was over. I watched Sienna's hands tremble as she packed her bag. Luca hissed something at her in Italian. I caught the word "stupid," and you said it was clean. She said nothing, just stared at me with that look, not of regret, but of a woman watching her carefully stacked world start to tilt. I waited until they were at the elevator before speaking. "You could have just walked away," I said softly. "But you had to win." She turned. "You think you've won, don't you?" "No," I replied. "But I'm not the one who just lost everything." I returned to LA that evening, not entirely sure what came next. But it didn't take long. Within a week, Luca's consulting firm was flagged by 2 regulatory boards. His name appeared in a financial crime report tied to offshore laundering. And Sienna? Her startup was blacklisted. 2 of her planned suppliers dropped out without explanation. Her brand account vanished from social media. Rumors circulated. Articles began to appear. Devereaux Holdings severs ties with spouse amid financial misconduct allegations. An alleged romantic scheme undermines West Coast deal. I didn't speak to Charles. I didn't need to. But one day, I received a package, no note, no card. Inside was a first edition of Orwell's Politics in the English language and a single line handwritten inside the cover. For knowing when words matter most. No signature. But I knew. And somehow that was enough. By the time the headlines died down, neither Sienna nor Luca had made any public statements. That was deliberate. Their lawyers were probably scrambling to contain the fallout, hoping silence would slow the spread of damage. It didn't. I watched from a distance as everything they'd built, or pretended to build, collapsed like a hollow facade under the weight of truth. Luca's firm shuttered its LA branch within days. Rumors swirled about pending investigations, misappropriated client funds, and foreign accounts frozen by regulators. One leaked email hinted at forged credentials. Another revealed client kickback schemes he'd run in Milan. Meanwhile, Sienna tried to pivot. She changed the name of her startup, swapped brand colors, even deleted all traces of Luca from her social media profiles. She began publishing posts about growth through adversity and reposted vague, inspirational quotes, the digital equivalent of sweeping glass shards under a rug and calling it clean. But reputations aren't that easy to rebrand. I knew something she didn't. People remember silence, especially when silence follows scandal. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. My work, technically, was done. But a part of me, the part that remembered how she laughed about Charles behind his back, how she whispered plans over encrypted apps while calling herself loyal in public, that part wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. So I made a quiet phone call. A journalist I'd worked with once on an international arbitration case owed me a favor. I didn't tell him what to write, just what to look into. Luca Navarro, Sienna Devereaux, Paris, Dubai. 2 contracts that didn't match. A pattern. He didn't ask why I knew what I knew. Good journalists don't. When the expose hit, it wasn't tabloid-style scandal. It was methodical, surgical. The language of deception, how power couples disguise corporate theft. It detailed fake financial structures, cited anonymous sources, embedded screenshots, one of which came from a very specific document Sienna never expected anyone to still have. Her Instagram went dark that same day. She vanished from LinkedIn the next. One by one, her startup's advisory board stepped down. Even her college removed her from the alumni featured founders list. Then came the conference cancellations. The keynote panels where she was supposed to speak, gone, replaced by substitute names and polite footnotes, due to unforeseen scheduling conflicts. But we all knew better. Meanwhile, Charles never once appeared in the media. He issued a single, carefully worded press release. I am cooperating with the proper financial authorities and have no further comment at this time. Then he vanished from view. I imagined him watching the wreckage unfold from his hilltop home, sipping black coffee in silence. A man who, after decades of building, had nearly lost everything to someone he trusted, and chose not to scream, but to dismantle her world piece by piece. I respected that. I emulated it. My own life returned to a kind of calm. Work resumed. New clients. Fresh assignments. But something in me had shifted. I was no longer the man who sat quietly while betrayal disguised itself in perfect grammar. No longer the observer who assumed distance made him safe. One morning, I received a message request. Not a name I recognized, just the initials, SD. I hesitated, then opened it. If you're reading this, you know what happened. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know, I didn't plan to fall for him. It wasn't all fake. I just made the wrong choice. There was no apology, just deflection. I didn't reply. What could I say? That she ruined a man who loved her for someone who only loved himself? That she gambled with reputations like poker chips? That she underestimated people like me? People who don't speak loudly, but listen carefully? No, she didn't deserve closure. She deserved consequence. And she got it. The final act wasn't mine. It came from someone I didn't even know. A quiet investor from Dubai, who'd once promised to fund her brand, filed a formal complaint alleging misrepresentation. The lawsuit, while civil, made headlines. That's how it ends for people like Sienna. Not with handcuffs, but with doors closing one by one. until the world she tried to dominate becomes a hallway with no exits. As for Luca, last I heard, he fled to Lisbon. Rumor was, he tried to pitch a new crypto venture under a false name. It didn't go far. The internet never forgets. Neither do people like me. I printed a copy of the exposé and filed it alongside my translation portfolio. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. Language can build empires. But it can also expose betrayal, frame guilt, and carve justice out of silence. I learned that in the quiet hours, between Paris meetings and whispered phone calls. I didn't plan to get involved. But when you see the truth, you either speak it or let it die in someone else's lie. And I don't let things die quietly. 2 months after the exposé, I found myself back in Paris, not by plan, but by coincidence. A new contract had brought me in to interpret for a legal tech summit. Different clients, different city block, same air. But walking those streets, I couldn't help but think of her. Of them. Not with anger. With precision. Their names no longer carried weight here. The firm that once hosted their events had scrubbed them from their press lists. Even the glossy magazine where Sienna had once smiled from a Women in FinTech cover now ran a piece titled The Fall of the Brand Queen. They didn't name her directly, but they didn't have to. Everyone knew. She was a ghost in her own industry now. One evening, after my final panel, I stopped at the cafe near the Seine. It was late, half empty. I took my usual seat in the corner and ordered an espresso. The waiter was new. The vibe was the same. Then I saw her. Across the street. Not dressed in crimson anymore. In gray. Sunglasses. Hair tied back. She wasn't walking with confidence now. She was looking down, checking her phone nervously, adjusting the strap on her worn leather bag. Alone. No driver. No entourage. No Luca. I didn't move. Didn't wave. Didn't let her know I was there. She crossed the street, passed within a few feet of me. And for a moment, I thought she'd look up. But she didn't. She walked past, disappeared around the corner, and was gone. That was all. No confrontation. No final words. Just the quiet sight of someone who thought the world would bow, now slipping between shadows, hoping no one would notice. I finished my espresso and left. The next day, I flew home. Weeks passed. Work returned to normal. Life moved on. But a single envelope landed on my desk one morning, no return address. Inside, a short letter, typed. Not signed. But I knew the tone. You ruined everything. I hope you think you're a hero. But you're just a man with a keyboard. You'll disappear too. Just wait. I burned it. Not out of fear. Out of finality. Because that's all she had left. Bitterness typed in the dark. Meanwhile, Charles thrived. Quietly. He reorganized his portfolio, moved investments, changed legal structures. Never once mentioned her. But those of us who knew, knew. He had survived a planned execution of his financial life and walked away wealthier, quieter, harder to fool. And Luca? He resurfaced in Montenegro under a false surname, pitching blockchain fraud prevention software. The irony was delicious. He'd changed his accent slightly, bleached his hair, rebranded his name. But you can't outrun certain patterns. A Romanian tech blog published a piece titled The Disgraced Men Behind the Curtain. His photo was in it. Blurry, but clear enough. The article was syndicated. Whatever future he had built, burned. The people who believed they were above everyone else, who twisted love and language into weapons, were now footnotes in case studies. And I went back to doing what I've always done. Translating. Listening. Watching. Only now, I carry a little less tolerance for liars. A little more sharpness behind the quiet. Once, I thought silence was neutrality. Now I know, silence is a choice. And I choose to use it wisely. This job makes you invisible sometimes. You hear everything. You say little. But that doesn't mean you're powerless. Sometimes, the quietest voice in the room is the one writing the final chapter. I never confronted Sienna in the street. Never exposed her to strangers. I didn't need to. Her own actions screamed louder than I ever could. All I did was give her words the audience they deserved, at the right time, with the right ears. That was enough. That was justice. In whispers.